So welcome everybody. Today we are honored with the presence of Dr. Roy Kaplan, and it is our first of a three-part series, our Historical Humanities series. Today's program is the Origins of Humanity. And then on Tuesday, July 20th is the Evolution of Anti-Semitism and Racism. And then our third one, we're moving, the second one is also taught by Dr. Kaplan. The third one, we're going to have another speaker. We're moving sort of from the academic to personal stories. We're going to be joined by Wanda Battle, who is currently living in Montgomery, Alabama, and she lived through the bus boycotts and is known as one of the top tour guides in Montgomery, showing civil rights history and teaching about slavery in Montgomery and also what it's like there today. So that'll be August 3rd. And I'm going to go ahead and jump in and introduce Dr. Roy Kaplan, who I have known since I was probably in high school. And I'll explain that a little bit more later, but I'll go ahead and jump in. Dr. Roy Kaplan teaches in the Africana Studies Department at the University of South Florida in Tampa. He was the executive director of the National Conference of Christians and Jews for Tampa Bay, now Community Tampa Bay, and served as an advisor to President Clinton's Race Relations Task Force. In 1998, he received a National Hero of Education Award from the U.S. Department of Education for his multicultural work in Florida schools. His most recent book is The Myth of Post-Racial America. And I thought I would share this tidbit, especially with the relevance to the Stanley Cup. In 2014, the Tampa Bay Lightning honored Dr. Roy Kaplan as the 19th Lightning Community Hero of the Year and received a $50,000 donation from the Lightning Foundation and the Lightning Community Heroes Program, which he donated all to Community Tampa Bay. I had the chance to meet Dr. Roy Kaplan actually in middle school. As mentioned, he used to be the director of the National Conference of Christians and Jews for Tampa Bay, and I had been dealing with some anti-Semitism in my school, and everybody said, contact Dr. Roy Kaplan to help address this issue. And so he came and opened up and spoke to our middle school class, and then we had a Holocaust survivor share their personal story as well. And then I also in high school participated in Camp Anytown, which is his program that he founded out of what is now Community Tampa Bay. So with that said, it is my great honor to introduce Dr. Roy Kaplan.
Oh, thank you very much, Leah. And I want to thank all the people.
Dr. Kaplan, we just need to unmute you.
Oh, okay. Should be. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you very much, Leah. And thanks for the fine introduction. And I'd like to thank the congregation, Beth Am, and all the people that may be watching now or in the future. This is a new experience for me to try and do this via, I guess, Skype or Zoom on the internet. I'm going to try and trace history in a way that covers a lot of time. And it might be, head spinning, but I'll do the best I can, and I'll try and pique your imagination and interest as we go along. So bear with me as I try and draw this very broad historical line. I thought, as a way of introducing the congregation and all the participants to the concept of race and racism, that let's go back to origins. Let's go back to find out how we got to where we are. And the best thing that I know to do this is to help people understand that we are all related. We may look different. We may have different colored skin or the shape of our nose or mouth or lips and the texture of our hair. But the reality is we're all 99.98% identical genetically. We have common DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. And we all originated out of Africa. A lot of people right away, no, we came from Europe. No, that's not the case. white people came out of Africa, but their ancestors left about 60,000 years ago to go to other places. But the reality is we are all descendants of one female who lived about 200,000 years ago in Africa, and she's called mitochondrial Eve. Mitochondrial Eve. We all share some DNA, common DNA with that one female. And all white males have a Y chromosome that links them to a male called Eurasian Adam, who lived about 60,000 years ago in Africa. Non-white males are even older. Their lineage goes back about 330,000 years to one male ancestor that lived in Africa. So if you trace the lineage, you can find out through DNA analysis that we are all related, even though we may look different. Now, the question is, why do we look different? Well, our ancestors left Africa at different times, and they went to different parts of the world. About 50,000 years ago, they got to Southeast Asia. 40,000 years ago, they got to Australia and to Europe and parts of Europe. The United States, or what was North America at the time, people came here about 15,000 years ago. That's being disputed today. Some Native Americans contend that it was 30,000 years ago that our ancestors arrived here. But we all originated in Africa. And when we got to these different places at different times, that meant that people were stuck because of obstacles. There were land barriers, mountain ranges, or rivers or oceans that prevented people from leaving. And once they got to these different places, they congregated and they interbred. And this actually meant that what happened was that they developed what were called haplogroups. And haplogroups are, a sophisticated scientific name for the fact that people who stayed in one place and interbred developed a culture and genes that were very similar to one another. And again, they also, with this culture, they developed a language and customs that set them apart from different groups. And this led to the creation of what we call ethnic groups, and eventually ethnocentricity, which meant that there was a feeling among these different groups that they were naturally superior to the other groups around them. But the fact remains that these ethnic groups shared a common ancestry. For example, Jews go back, the lineage goes back over 4,000 years. But the reality is they are linked to non-Jews as well as Jewish people. They share very common characteristics with Jewish people, but the vast majority of our genetic makeup is identical to people who aren't Jewish. The fact is that we trace this lineage back thousands and thousands of years. And because we are genetically linked, we can exchange blood, bones, tissues, organs. The fact is that we have more similarities than we do differences. I give the case of my wife, for example, maybe 15 years ago, she was having a lot of difficulty with constant pain and numbness. And so she had surgery where they go through your neck and they fix discs that were herniated in her neck, and they replaced them. Now, I was waiting in the waiting room, and the doctor came by after about an hour, and I thought it was a 3-hour operation. I got scared, and I said, "What's going on?" He said, no, I just did my work, and the rest of the team is taking over now. And they're replacing, they're replacing your discs, and they're putting in plates and screws and bones. And I said, "Well, where did you get the bone from?" And he said, "Well, cadaver bones. And after about a year, they regenerate and they start growing." She didn't ask, was it a man or what color was the donor? It didn't matter. After the operation, she was in the hospital for just one day, and she was already recuperating and felt 100% better. She did not care. And about 2 years ago, she had cornea transplants, one in each eye, because she has a disease called Fuchs dystrophy. And that the only cure for that is to have a cornea transplant. And consequently, I know that she told me the first time she was in the operating room, and the physician said, "Would you like to see your new cornea?" He had it in a little case and showed it to her. They got it from a donor. The fact is that it works regardless of your religion, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your skin color. The cornea transplants work, and she takes drops once a day or once every other day. And today, because of immunosuppressant drugs, even though the best donors are ones that are living related donors, some cases that's not possible. And you do transplants, and these immunosuppressive drugs prevent rejection. Not in all cases, but the power, call it God or whatever you want to call it, the higher power. The reality is that we were put here with the ability to think and make decisions on our own. And from our discoveries, from our scientific investigation, we know through science that we have this lineage, that we are all interconnected, even spiritually. For example, there's a tribe in Africa, in Sentamuli, South Africa, called the Lemba, L-E-M-B-A. And I always show a video about this to my classes when I teach and we always start out my course on racism in American society, covering this material because I want to show the common origins that we have, how we're really linked, how racism is a concept we call it a scientific, an unscientific construct. It's not at all scientific. Racism is something that was created. And it was created to justify the domination and exploitation of indigenous people when people from Europe spread around the world and conquered these people and claimed their territory for God, king, and country. And the reality is that racism is something to justify that domination, exploitation, just like the doctrine of discovery, where settlers, where explorers landed in a certain continent and stuck down a flag and said, we claim this for Spain, or we claim this for England, or we claim this for the Netherlands, something like that. That's not justified. When they landed in North America, Native Americans didn't have written records of who owned property. They went from one place to another. They were nomadic or semi-nomadic, but they did grow crops and they did cultivate these crops and they did plant things on an annual basis. And they fished and they hunted in certain areas depending on the time of the year. And so when the explorers landed here and they claimed these places and they started moving in, the Native Americans were upset. We would be, if someone moved into my backyard, I'd be upset, and they didn't have any documentation to prove that they own the land. Well, if you can't prove you own it, we have it. They took it. Well, the Native Americans started to fight back. Get off our land. Get out of our property. You're destroying our ecological balance. You're destroying our relationship to nature. And so here's a statistic I recall. I have a new book coming out next year, winter or spring, called Indians at the Margin. And it's all about the origin of stereotypes about Native Americans. Do you know that at the time of first contact, when Columbus, or actually there were people here before Columbus, but at the time of first contact, there were estimated to be 50 million to 100 million indigenous people living, Indians or whatever. Columbus was off track, that's why he called them Indians. He thought he was in India. But at the time of the first contact, there was 50 million to 100 million people, indigenous people living in North, Central, and South America. By 1900, in the United States, or what we call the United States today, there were less than 200,000 still alive. Today, there are about 6 million. All right, but they are the highest rate of exogenous relationships. That is, they marry out more than any other group outside of their ethnic group. But that's all part of my new book, and I talk a little bit about that and how these stereotypes persist. The point I want to make here is that I don't have any Native American ancestry, but I can tell you that one of the Discovery Channel many years ago did a research project, and they checked the DNA, and they had 6 people. There was an African American, a Native American, some woman from Greece, and so on. And do you know that they found the 2 people most closely related was the Native American and the woman from Greece, because they found that their ancestors came from different parts of the world and wound up here in the United States. Those were the 2 people of the 6 that were most closely related. I've done DNA research, and I found that I'm 98% Ashkenazi Jew. No surprise there. But 2% are Sephardic, because I have a great-grandma. I had a great-grandmother that was from Turkey. My great-grandfather fled from Russia and wound up in Turkey, and consequently part of the family comes from that part of the world. My wife's family is far more interesting. She's a convert to Judaism, And she had a great grandmother who she's writing a book about right now, who was Jewish and lived in England. And they have a much more varied ethnic background and diversified background. And again, let me talk a little bit about this concept of race, because it is unscientific. It is something that doesn't exist. There's only one race, Homo sapiens. That means thinking men and women, Homo sapiens. All of the differences that you see, the shape of your nose, your eyes, your lips, the texture of your hair, these things are evolutionary adaptations to the environment. Because as our ancestors left and went to different parts of the world, they changed. But this takes a lot of time. You know, in the early days of our country, there was a real dilemma that the clergymen had to face, and that was, how can God, it says in the Bible that God created the heavens and the earth, you know, the Genesis story, and that Adam and Eve were the first creation of humans in God's image. But the problem was that some had dark skin, and some had reddish tint to their skin, and some had yellowish tint to their skin. How is that possible? If God created all human beings and they're all descendants, actually, if you go along with the Bible, we're all descendants of Noah, because the world was wiped out in the great flood. And Noah had 3 sons. And that's another, maybe we'll deal with that another time. But there is a curse that was put on one of his sons, because he supposedly found his father naked and intoxicated, and ridiculed him. And so supposedly that curse was called the curse of Ham, because that was the name of the son. And he was supposedly going to rule over people, have dominion over people with dark colored skin. But that stereotype still persists to this day. The reality is, though, that when the early clergymen in the United States, or in this country, were grappling with the problem of what was called monogenetic thesis, and that is the origin was uniform, all from one place, they couldn't explain why there were these differences. But their problem was that they didn't understand that the world was far older than they thought. They thought if you look at the Bible and take the literal interpretation of the Bible, the world is 5,000 years old. But we know that this planet is really over 4 billion years old. All right. The solar system, the galaxy, and the universe are about 18 billion years old. Don't ask me what existed before. We don't know. Just there was supposedly a big bang, all right, that created the universe. And today scientists are toying with the theory that there may be multiple universes, maybe 11 or 15, or who knows, an infinite number. The reality is that the world was much older than they had hypothesized. And some of the people who felt that it couldn't be of a single origin of all humans, that there must be a multiple origin, those were called polygeneticists. And one of the most famous ones was a professor at Harvard by the name of Louis Agassiz, and he came originally from Switzerland. And Agassiz, just like the famous soccer player, maybe they're related, I don't know. We're all related if you go back far enough. And one of my favorite shows by Henry Louis Gates, which is on Tuesday nights on public television, Finding Your Roots. He does a wonderful job of exposing the roots of some celebrities every week, and it's a fascinating story. Incidentally, there's also something on HBO Max that I would highly recommend to you. It's a 4-part series by a fellow by the name of Peck, Raoul Peck, and it's called Exterminate All the Brutes. And it gets into the history of colonialism and imperialism, and it does a wonderful job of laying bare some of the roots of the hatred and the stereotypes and the racism that led to the domination and exploitation of people. Getting back to this whole notion about polygeneticism and monogeneticism, the monogeneticists were right. You know, as it turns out, we all came out of Africa about 60,000 years ago when the Great Migration occurred. And our ancestors left Africa because they were in search of food. They killed everything that lived there, you know, all the low-hanging fruit. And they also had a wanderlust. They wanted to move out. Climate was changing, and so they changed. As they went north, some of our ancestors went north, just like my ancestors. So I have lighter skin. They have lighter skin because they wanted to get, the body adapted. There was a need to get vitamin D, which comes from the sunlight, to prevent against rickets and scurvy and depression. And we know today that people that live in the northern climates have high rates of alcoholism, suicide, drug addiction, and depression. And we know that they have to take supplements. And sometimes it's done from inside lighting because, you know, the sun doesn't shine in those places in the winter. Right now, I've been to places like Alaska and Norway, but I've been in the summer and the sun is up at 3 a.m. in the morning. I remember in Norway, it went down at 3 a.m. It was up at 5 a.m. Amazing. But you better get your sunlight while you can, because during the winter, you're not going to see much of it. All right. So here's the point that I'm trying to make. Even though they have that adaptation, it doesn't change their genetic makeup. And we find, for example, the sickle cell gene, which is common in many African Americans and can be deadly and very painful, that actually evolved in Africa to prevent against malaria. And it's also found in some Swedes. Now, how would it get there? Well, they're genetically linked. The sickle cell gene is found in some people in Scandinavia, as well as some people of African descent. Now, why do people have dark skin? They have dark skin because the melanin in their body is manufactured to help protect them from the ultraviolet and infrared light of the sun. They also have curly hair. It's not nappy, it's not kinky, it's not bad hair, it's not good hair and bad hair. You see, when you talk about things like that, you're starting to impose your Eurocentric ideas that people who look like Europeans are the most superior people in the world. Well, that's just not the case. We are all related. And when they have curly hair like that, that is designed to help for more rapid evaporation and cooling, because most of the body's excess heat is expended through the scalp. The same with narrow eyes that some people of Asian descent have. And that's because their ancestors moved out of Africa and about 50,000 years ago wound up on the steppes of Central Asia, vast plains, expanses where they had huge windstorms. And through evolution, the body changed to prevent them from the winds blowing sand into their eyes. So they have them narrower eyelids, the epicanthic fold it's called. It doesn't affect their intelligence. In a little while, we're going to get into differences in intelligence and athletic ability. There are no significant differences in intelligence and athletic ability. Leah, you could show them that that chart from the Khan Academy that depicts the evolution and the stages of migration of people out of Africa. And you can see, there we go. Now, they wound up in all these different places. And you can see the emphasis on Africa right in the beginning, and how our ancestors went to Asia and then to Europe. Oh, that's wonderful. And Khan Academy is amazing stuff. And so this is a wonderful depiction of it. And there you see the timeline too. 40,000 years ago, 25,000 years ago. When I was in Australia many years ago, around 2000, I had an Aboriginal guide. And I already knew the answer, but I asked him the question. Silly me, I shouldn't have done that. But I said, how long have your people been here? And he said, we've been here forever. Well, that's just not the case. We know that they came there about 40,000 years ago, but they have something the Aboriginals call the dream time. And that's when supposedly people arrived. The reality is that many Native Americans believe that they've been here forever. That's just not the case. There's some dispute as exactly when their ancestors came, but there's a classic study that happened when Arizona State University, I believe it was, there was this, an anthropologist asked for blood samples to do some work on the origin of diabetes, which is a common problem among Native Americans. And when she didn't find anything, she did it was an unsolicited and it wasn't requested by her, the permission to do a genetic analysis. And she found that the origin of this particular group, the Havasupai Indians that live in the area of the Grand Canyon, that they had a genetic tie with people who migrated here from Asia about 18,000 years ago. She proved basically through DNA analysis, that they were descendant of people from Asia. And of course, that didn't go over well. And there was a suit that eventuated in a $600,000 settlement because she had misused the genetic material that she had obtained from them. And that's a classic case where scientists did not level with people or do what they said that they would do with the data. They have their own mythological case for their origins, and these Havasupai Indians were not happy with the outcome of that particular project. All right, so let me go on and talk a little bit more about origins. We also have spiritual ties to one another. For example, the Lemba tribe that I started talking about a little while ago in Sentamuli, South Africa, they claim that they're Jewish. And there was no evidence that that could possibly be. How are these dark-skinned Africans related to Jews? Jews are white or light-skinned. Well, and Jesus Christ was Semitic. He was not white. He didn't have blue eyes and blonde hair in all probability. There was a famous problem with someone from Fox News that got into that, and she had to apologize for that because she also said Santa Claus was white. Be that as it may, there was DNA genetic research that was done. A fellow by the name of Goldstein has written a book about the Lalemba in South Africa. What they did was they took DNA swabs that you take from people from their mouth and squamous epithelial cells or from the nose, and you can do a DNA analysis. And they did. They found that 1 in every 10 of the males of the Lemba tribe were actually had a Y chromosome identical with all the Kohanim, all of the male Jews who were claimed to be Kohanim, descendants of Moses' brother Aaron. And it proved that, in fact, they were descendants. The Lemba were direct descendants of the Jews. Now, some of them are Christians, and that's because they were forced to, in order to go to school, the missionaries required them to convert. And so they're both Christians and Jews in some of that tribe in Sentamuli, South Africa. And I also append this to let you know that the white Jews in South Africa rejected them. They didn't want them. They said, you have to convert. They said, well, we're already Jewish. We're not going to convert. And they have different, some different rituals and things, but they do have kosher, and they, and they do circumcise the boys, but they wait for, instead of 8 days, 8 years. And that was a very painful experience. But the reality is that Jews are an ethnic group. They're a religious group. They're not a racial group. And I'm very disturbed by one of the statements that's made in this particular video by one of the leaders of the Lemba tribe. Says, that he leads you to believe that we are different somehow genetically. They are not different. We as Jews are not different. Although throughout history we've been labeled as being different in some genetic way from other people. And of course, you know that the eugenicists, and I'm going to talk about that in my next presentation, the eugenicists and Hitler carried this to extremes. And we're still paying for this today, unfortunately. I'm taking a course right now on the Holocaust, and I teach it in my classes, and I can tell you that it's an aberration. We are no different from any other group, just like Blacks and Native Americans and Asians are no different from any other group. We couldn't do all the things we can do biologically if we are systematic organic differences. All right? Now,
Kaplan, would you like me to show the video, the National Geographic video?
Yeah, let's talk about a typical person, what a typical person in the world might look like. This would be a good little video to see right now. This is called typical. We're going to show this one later. There we go. Okay, very good. There is no typical. I mean, we're all unique, we're all different, but we have more similarities than differences. And as I pointed out, in a few years, just about 10 years or so, the most typical person will be from India, because India has a higher growth rate than China. You notice that recently China has amended its population policies and its family planning policies. They liberalized it. Instead of just allowing one child, you can have 2 children, and now sometimes even 3. The reality is that you need a growing population in order to create opportunities for movement in society. No one wants to be in a static system. Japan has a population problem. The Japanese growth rate is lower than its death rate, and they're having serious labor shortages. In the United States right now, that's a wonderful segue to talk about migration and immigration. We're having, because of the pandemic, it opened up fissures in our society. It showed weaknesses in our framework, in our institutions, on family care and child care, and all kinds of associated problems that so-called essential workers. We treated them as non-essential workers. We treated them as if they really didn't matter until we needed them. And now we find that some people don't want to return to their previous jobs because the pay was so low or the working conditions so poor. And so what we're finding is that we really need immigrants in this society. We've always needed immigrants. When the nation was developing as an industrial base, we relied very heavily on people who came through Ellis Island. So, over like 20 million people or more came to Ellis Island. Some of our ancestors, at one point, over 100 million people in this country could trace their origins to people who immigrated through Ellis Island. And that was essential. And we're no different today than we were then. We need people here to fill these jobs. They start at the bottom and they move up to the top. All right. And there are many corporations that are headed or created by people who are immigrants to the society. For example, you might think about things like Amazon and Google. These are people that were immigrated here, and they are absolutely indispensable to the well-being of our social system. Let me talk a little bit about something I opened up the door to. And that is the differences in athletic behavior and intellectual behavior. I think that we get hung up on these things. This is ethnocentrism, the belief that your group is naturally superior to all others. The reality is that whether or not people achieve athletically or intellectually is a result of culture. It's a result of opportunities, and it's a result of motivation. How hard are you willing to work to get what you want to achieve? And how many obstacles are put in your path? What kinds of motivation do you get to achieve the goals that you've set out for yourself? Now, it's said that Jews are intellectually superior. Well, we don't like to think that. I worked pretty damn hard for whatever I got. I didn't work very hard all through elementary and high school. And then I started in college. And when I was in college, in high school, they told me I'd never go to college. I didn't fail my driver's test. I just wasn't into it. I just didn't take that kind of interest in it. I had other interests. I was into all kinds of sports. I played baseball and football, and I was a captain of the wrestling team and the swimming team. Cross country, I did them all, everything but my work, And I was going out with my wife. We're married 55 years now. We went all through high school together and so on. So I had a lot of distractions. The fact is that when I started to settle down, I realized that I had to make up for a lot of lost time. I'm still trying to make up for it too. I still am learning things every day. And I have that goal. Even though I'm retired or semi-retired, I still try to read every day and learn different things, because that's why we're here, isn't it? We come and we have to live this place better than the way we found it. And that's Tzedakah, isn't it? I mean, that's the whole concept of giving back to help other people. And every religion of the world has that perspective. Even if we come from a different or totally different orientation than Judaism, we have the common obligation to fulfill the need to make this world a better place for those that will be here after us. And so the Jewish intellectual tradition is very powerful. Jews were excluded throughout history. They weren't allowed to vote in many countries. They weren't allowed to own property in many countries. They developed a language called Yiddish that had elements of Eastern European, German, and other kinds of roots, and they spoke Yiddish, but they were ostracized. They were forced to live in the Pale of Settlement or in shtetls, and there were pogroms against them, and we can talk about this later on, but I wanted to point out that they turned inward. They studied the Talmud and Torah, and they became intellectually oriented. And about 23% of the Nobel Prizes that have been awarded, which is probably the most prestigious award that you can get, have been awarded to Jews. And yet they're less than 1% of the world's population. How do you account for that? Are we intellectually superior? Well, I'll give you the answer to that in a minute. You probably guess. On the other hand, it was thought that Jews are very poor athletically. And that they can't play sports. We have a little video, I think, Leah, that you might want to show them a little with Al Michaels. I didn't know that Al Michaels was Jewish. All right, I grew up with I appreciate Al Michaels as a great commentator on football and other sports, and I didn't know this. And so we're going to show you a little clip, just a piece of this, and you can go to the web and get the whole thing if you want.
Our story in sports is the quintessential Jewish story.
Beckham, glorious!
A kid today sees a member of the Jewish faith winning the Super Bowl. It's very powerful.
It's good to have you with us.
Nelson Mandela famously said, sports have the ability to change the world.
We are connecting to that modern tradition of being strong and resolute and, yes, athletic, competing against the world.
In the beginning, we respected the strongest among us, Samson, Gideon, David. Yet over time, the biblical image of the strong and powerful Jew gave way to a stereotype of people who are weak, unwilling to fight, unable to truly compete on the athletic field. This belief that Jews don't do sports exists even today, sometimes humorously reinforced by Jews themselves in movies, television, and in pop culture.
This is ridiculous. Jews can't play basketball.
But where did it come from? How did this stereotype begin? The answers can be found in the early practice of our faith. Between the eras of the first and second temples, we were ruled by the ancient Greeks who idolized physical perfection. And then came the Romans, whose sporting events were barbaric.
I don't think anyone in Western civilization would embrace Greek and Roman sports today. Sports then was a form of worshiping the body, and it was kind of brutal too, not to mention murderous, so that wasn't very Jewish.
Getting involved in sports in the ancient time period was one of the things that took Jews away from being Jewish. So the reconciliation of being a Jew and being involved in sports really has a 2,500, almost 3,000-year history.
Over the centuries that followed our exile from the land of Israel, the hardships of the diaspora made pursuit of sports near impossible for our people. And for those young people who wanted to participate, governments put up barriers, rabbis discouraged our involvement, and parents pushed their children toward careers that could be stable, respectable, and portable in times of crisis. For Jewish mothers, the idea of my son, the doctor, was much more appealing than my son, the football player. But as the 19th century was coming to a close, the winds of change were in the air.
The iconic moment is 1898, the Second Zionist Congress. Dr. Max Nordau makes a very important speech, and he says what we need as part of the Zionist movement is muscular Judaism, a cadre of young men and young women who are strong, who are going to dispel the image of the weak Jew, and who will compete against the world on the athletic field, perhaps someday on the military field.
In fact, the transformation that Nordau wished for was already underway. Jewish athletes had won 6 gold medals at the first modern Olympics in Athens 2 years earlier. And as the 20th century dawned, a new era began for Jews in sports.
Well, that's a wonderful contribution, and you can get the rest of that on the web. I would like to say that, you know, while we don't think of Jews as being very active in sports, at the turn of the 20th century, opportunities for upward mobility were blocked for many people because of anti-Semitism and other kinds of economic hardships that people endured. And as this video was showing, Jews became prominent in some of these sports to try and get upward mobility. Barney Ross was the lightweight champion of the world in boxing. Bunny Levitt, a little later on, was played with the Harlem Globetrotters, and still, I think to this day, has the record for consecutive free throws. And there were many other Jewish athletes. They showed Sandy Koufax, probably, I know, one of the greatest baseball pitchers who ever lived. Maybe I wouldn't say the greatest, but one of the very greatest. And he's still alive. I remember seeing him many years ago. I used to live in Vero Beach, Florida. And they had the Dodgers training camp there. And he was there standing with Pete Rose talking, and we watched them. He's just a few feet away. Fascinating. I ran into Hank Greenberg when I was a child. And Hank Greenberg was one of the greatest Jewish baseball players who ever lived, who would have broken Babe Ruth's record, but they refused to pitch to him after he got around 50 home runs. Mo Berg was a great baseball player. And so contemporaneously today, we have Ryan Braun, who recently, I think he's retired now, but he played for Milwaukee and so on. And so there are great Jewish athletes to hopefully dispel the stereotype. But then the obverse of this is that blacks are great athletes, but poor intellectually. And we know that that is equally fallacious. You think about blacks in sports at the in the 1800s and early 1900s, the colonial powers that were out of Europe, England and France and the Netherlands and Germany and Belgium, and Spain, they all depicted blacks as inferior intellectually and athletically. They couldn't play soccer. Well, for crying out loud, how are they going to play soccer? They never saw soccer before. You introduce a sport, you're not going to assume that they're automatically going to excel. Well, as it turns out, they turn out to be great soccer players. Why are there only about 8% of the baseball players in the United States that are African American? Can't they play baseball? About 30 to 35% of the baseball players in the United States are of Latino descent, Latinx. One country that produces most baseball players besides the United States is the Dominican Republic. But that's on the island of Hispaniola. The other half of the island is Haiti. Haiti. Now, what happens there? We don't find Haitian baseball players, but we do find Haitian soccer players. It's cultural. It's cultural. You look at this thing. Dominicans are great baseball players. Why do the Dominicans play baseball? They want to get the hell off that island. They want to come here to the United States. And every Major League Baseball team has training facilities in the Dominican Republic. They train and recruit those players. Given the motivation and the opportunity, you can make people into different things intellectually as well as athletically. I'm not saying that we all have the same intellectual athletic ability. It's not identical. There are differences. And we know that there are polymorphisms. Now, there are genetic mutations that occur. Once about every 12,000 years, a positive one occurs. So if you looked at, we're out of Africa 60,000 years. So there have been about a dozen of these polymorphisms that have permeated the genetic chain of humans, all right? A dozen of them. That will not account and does not account for athletic and intellectual differences. It's culture. How hard are you willing to work? What kind of opportunities do you have? And what kind of obstacles are put in your path? You look at things like bocce. You know what bocce is? Bocce, B-O-C-C-E. That's the type of bowling that is common among Italians. Or you look at, so they're very good. And I remember as a kid seeing people play bocce down the road for where I lived. They had carved out of the woods a bocce court, and they would be there. Bowling is a tradition in that culture. You look at highlight. Well, most of the highlight players are Basque, and that's a part of Europe, bordering on France and Spain, and they've had a lot of a move for independence from those countries. And the highlight players are very good. Highlight players are very good at it because that's part of their culture. The same thing with when I was in Hawaii, we went on a tour, and we found that the Latter-day Saints, Mormons, recruited very heavily students for Brigham Young University, University of Utah, especially football players. Right now, there are about 40 players in the National Football League who are of Polynesian descent. They come from Hawaii and the other islands. Why? Because they were recruited to come to North America to play football. All right. And they were given that opportunity. The NBA today, and the players in the NBA, about 3/4 of them are African American, but about 1/4 of them come from countries all over the world. One place in particular, the former Yugoslavia. Why is it that people from that country play basketball? Because it became part of their culture. And so you can look at this over and over again, that there are there are people who are given an opportunity to take advantage of the challenges that are confronting them, and they move forward. Some people have stronger motivation to succeed than others. The question is, why do Jewish children and Jewish adults excel intellectually? Again, I told you we would revisit this. The answer is the child rearing practices and expectations of Jewish parents. The belief is that you should make children independent, that they should be able to solve problems on their own, and they should focus on intellectual endeavors. Now, again, you saw that little clip with Al Michaels, said at the turn of the 20th century, things started to change, and they're very different today. So you find more and more Jewish children going into sports. I don't know if Beckham was Jewish, but it showed him in there. I never knew that, but that's possible. All I can tell you is that if you give a child the kind of motivation and opportunity to excel, regardless of their skin color, they will be able to achieve. But the obstacles have to be overcome. And some people have more obstacles put in their path than others. Now, I have another video I want to show you, because I want to pose this question to you before you see this. This is a little longer. It's called A Girl Like Me. It's about Kiri Davis. Kiri Davis was a young African-American girl living in New York City. And she wanted to show the power that racism has by over children, by showing, replicating the experiments done by people who actually contributed to the Brown versus Board of Education U.S. Supreme Court decision that said separate but equal or inherently unequal, and that you can't have separate educational facilities in our society. I want you to look at this Kiri Davis video, because it shows how strongly children learn the message that white is right and superior to black in our society. And that gets to the very heart of racism, the belief that one group is naturally superior to another. We are all basically alike. As I said before, we have more similarities than differences. We have to overcome the belief that our group is ethnocentrically superior to all other groups. Given the opportunity, we can achieve, but we have more obstacles put in our path. And as Jews, we know that anti-Semitism has prevented us throughout history from achieving things or getting involved in certain areas or disciplines. And there were quotas put on Jews and their admission to teach and enter the Ivy League schools for a long time. But today, those quotas don't exist. And I just noticed, we're dating this clip right now, but the young woman who was a professor and denied tenure at the University of North Carolina, and they just gave her tenure, but she turned it down to go to Howard University, a historically black university. And she felt that, I shouldn't have to make this decision. But if they were going to be racist in not awarding me tenure, which she deserved by developing a curriculum called the 1619 curriculum. And I read an article that she wrote last summer before I knew who she was in the New York Times Magazine section. It was so outstanding and so historically based and sound academically. I asked my classes to read it because I thought it was so well done. And then when I saw that she was denied tenure on a very narrow vote, and it was really one holdout on the Board of Trustees, and then they finally reneged and she turned them down. I really believe that this is a very good illustration of how we have to overcome our racist belief that one group is naturally superior to another. And I would like you to join with me and watch this short video. It's about 7 minutes long. Kiri Davis, A Girl Like Me.
Every black female has a big butt and big boobs.
Loud, obnoxious, ghetto.
Light skin being more attractive than dark skin.
We're not smart. We're this way, we're that way. And a lot of times we have to prove ourselves as not being true.
At a young age, I already knew the standards for a girl like me. As I become older, they become more obvious.
You have to have permed hair, relaxed hair.
Straight hair or like blonde hair, long waves or something.
And if it's natural, that's good hair. Like bad hair is hair you have to relax because it's kinky.
Like it's not like appealing to have like natural hairstyles, or like if they are natural, they have to be like the curly head like black girls or something that looks mixed or something.
I remember when I first started wearing my hair natural, at first my mom was okay with it. And she thought it looked nice. And then after like the second day, she was like, oh, stop that. She was like, you're starting to look African. I was like, well, I am African. And that really pissed me off.
There are standards that are imposed upon us. Like, you're prettier if you're light skinned. I know people in the past that wanted to be light-skinned, not for any particular reason, because they love themselves. I mean, they love themselves except for, the color of their skin.
Like, my siblings are all lighter than me, and my mom, she's dark-skinned, but she's lighter than me. So, I noticed, and I was like, hey, how come I'm the darkest? And, everybody else is so light, and I don't know. Since I was younger, I also considered being lighter as a form of beauty or, beautiful than being dark skinned. So I used to think of myself as being ugly because I was dark skinned.
I knew people who actually went out there and got bleaching cream and everything. They actually laid in the tub, poured capfuls of bleach into it just so they could see if their skin would get lighter.
But yeah, my aunt that lives in Honduras, she basically started using skin bleaching cream when she was about 25. And she started her oldest daughter on it when she was about 11. And then she has an even younger daughter that was about 6 when she started using the skin bleaching cream on her.
I've seen people say that I would never marry a dark-skinned man because I don't want that in my gene pool. On the other hand, light-skinned girls have their issues too. We've been called high yellow, conceited, house nigga. I feel like both sides have their issues.
I guess I sort of felt like there was not any attention towards me because of maybe my skin color or because my hair was kinky or, just basically that. Or even when I was younger, say there was, I don't know, a doll. I used to have a lot of dolls, but most of them were just white dolls with long straight hair that I would comb, and I would be like, oh, I wish I was just like this Barbie doll.
In Brown versus Board of Education, the famous case that desegregated schools in the 1950s, Dr. Kenneth Clark conducted a doll test with black children. He asked them to choose between a black doll and a white doll. In most instances, the majority of the children preferred the white doll. I decided to reconduct this test as Dr. Clark did to see how we've progressed since then.
Can you show me the doll that you like best or that you'd like to play with?
This one. I like that one.
Thank you.
This one.
That one?
I like to play with this.
And can you show me the doll that is the nice doll? And why is that the nice doll?
She's white.
And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay. And can you and why does that look bad?
Because it's black.
And why do you think that's a nice doll?
Because she's white.
And can you give me the doll that looks like you? "15 out of the 21 children preferred the white doll."
Our ancestors came to this country and they were pretty much ripped out of their culture. You know, they couldn't speak their language. They couldn't, you know, they couldn't be themselves. They had to be like what everybody else told them to be. When you don't know where you're from and you don't know what country you're from, all you know is basically you're from Africa, that's all you're given, I feel like it brings on like a lot of ignorance and it builds a lot of anger. I've seen it build a lot of anger in a lot of Black young females. Like, I don't know, they feel like because they feel like they have a right to disown any kind of, you know, African roots.
I think for a Black girl in general, it's like you're missing a piece of you, you know? And for me, yeah, it's like, oh, I don't have any actual heritage, not heritage, but culture. Like, I know I'm from Africa, but, you know, the different countries in Africa have their different cultures, their different morals, their different values. And not knowing that, it sort of keeps us at a loss. And I feel like we're busy searching for it while everybody else in society is throwing their ideas and what they believe we should be at us. But, you know, personally, we know that's not what we should be, but we're going to take it because we don't know exactly what it is that we should be, because we don't really know where we came from.
Okay. Well, that's a very powerful film because, and I've shown it to my classes and I've shown it in a forum at Eckerd College for a couple of years to the incoming freshmen. It's very powerful because it demonstrates conclusively how much the dominant white culture in our society influences people of color. Everything from sales of bleaching cream to perfume and all kinds of other body washes and things, trying to imitate the European conception of what is beauty. And not only that, but the assumptions about behavior. You can see the good doll and the bad doll. Kenneth and Mimi Clark did that basic research for the U.S. Supreme Court, and actually was for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and the person who tried the case became the U.S. Supreme Court justice later on. Obviously, he was the first African-American justice on the United States Supreme Court. Let me just point out that there is this fear of the other in our society, and that is based upon the belief that we are somehow superior to people who look different. And it turns out that whenever we are in small groups, the groups develop this ethnocentric pride, the belief that the group is superior to everyone else. It's a feeling that's not uncommon, and yet it is detrimental to the well-being of society. I want to leave you with these thoughts, you know, and next time when we get together, I'm going to present more information about the rise of racism and eugenics and the belief that that the gene pool of the Anglo-Saxon Protestants is naturally or inherently superior to all others. And before I say goodbye and I'll see you the next time, I want you to think about this. Why do we fear and loathe the other? What is it about our society today that leads us to believe that groups like the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, the Proud Boys, QAnon, have the answer, and that their answer, which seems to be white supremacy, is the solution to the problem? There is no problem. That's the point I want to make. The problem doesn't exist. This country has been based upon immigration and domination and exploitation of indigenous people. But without the immigrants, without the changes that were brought, the new ideas, the evolution of ways of thinking and doing things, we wouldn't be who we are today. The fact is that the United States is still evolving, and voter suppression that's being practiced throughout our country, and with over 300 bills introduced to state legislatures around the country right now, voter suppression is not going to triumph in the end because the demographic changes are already in place in this society. We are becoming a more mixed country, genetically mixed, and that the genes will win out. Human beings will not be kept down. They will be able to triumph in the end. The fact is, our society is becoming more integrated, and this integration of skin color and genetics is for the common good. If we give people equal opportunities to motivate, and we have opportunities for motivation and success, giving people equal opportunities will, in the end, solve our financial and scientific problems. One last thought. In the Holocaust, there were 1.5 million Jewish children that were murdered. We know, with the tradition of intellectualism among Jews, not biologically superior, but the tradition of culture, emphasis on achievement, intellectual achievement, that great things have happened because of Jews. And the Nobel Prize awards prove that. Just think of what we lost by the extermination of the 1.5 million Jewish children. But each year, over 1 million children drop out of our schools in the United States. And discipline, out of school suspensions, and expulsions are much higher for children of color. Think of what we're losing by losing these children every year in our society. Think of what we could become if we gave people equal opportunities for upward mobility in our society. Racism is a very serious disease. We have to work to overcome it. And of all people, our ethnic group, not a racial group, but our religious and ethnic